All right, ready to go?
Uh-huh.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Giovanna. Oh, I always do that. This is the second time today that I've been like, "You ready?" And the person drinks, and I'm like,
Hello.
"Hello." Okay. One more time. Thanks for
Okay.
joining us, Giovanna.
Hi, so good to be here.
It's so good to have you with us. I met Giovanna when I was on her podcast, The Well Woman Show, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think it was the first of my podcast tour podcasts to promote my book. So it was very exciting to join you on your show and get to talk about quitting. And then afterward, Giovanna's like, I had many quits. And I'm like, oh, do tell. And so, by the
Yeah.
way, before we get started, this Well Woman show, this is widely heard. You're on local radio and you're on NPR in Albuquerque, but you're also on the NPR One app if anybody would like to find you, correct?
Yes, yeah, that's right. NPR One app and, iTunes and all the other podcast apps. But yeah, the Well Woman Show on NPR.
Very, very cool. So Giovanna has a quit that I have been dying to feature. And, about 40 episodes in, finally, I have somebody who is willing to share their journey with quitting smoking. Now, as a little bit of preface here, I always tell people, no, I do not talk about quitting smoking or quitting vices. The quitting that I talk about in strategic quitting is different, but there is an intersection between the two because there's an entire industry out there that is devoted to quitting smoking and the vices, and that's why I keep things separate, and because I'm a medical doctor and I don't necessarily want those two to cross. But almost every vice, if you're going to quit that vice, you're going to have to quit something before you quit the actual smoking, gambling, whatever it is. And it may be a mindset, it may be a belief, it may be an environment. And Giovanna has said, yes, that was exactly her story, and she is willing to share. So,
Yeah.
Giovanna, if you could take us back to before you made your series of quits,
Yes.
and however you'd like to lead into that, and let us know what was going on in your life at that time.
Yeah. So this was about 15 years ago. And I just basically, quitting smoking and the other things that I quit were sort of byproducts of the major quitting that I was doing, which was really quitting lying to myself and quitting. Um, I had to sort of change my identity in order to really live with integrity and live an aligned life. And this all sort of came to a head because I was um, engaged to be married, and I had a successful career, and I just sort of everything looked like it was awesome and fabulous. I had just graduated with a master's degree from one of the best colleges in the world, and things were sort of ticking along, and from the outside looked pretty good. But problem was is that I was miserable, and um, there's that point in time when you don't admit to yourself that you're actually needing to make a change. But once you articulate it and say it out loud, it's like you can't get it back.
So true. Such a good point.
You let it out, and it's like, okay, it's out there now. It's living. It's a living, breathing thing of its own, and you can't go back. And so, what happened was, one day I was in Washington D.C. at a conference, and I had a colleague there, really good friend of mine, and we sat down after the conference and we were just chatting. And she said, "So you're getting married?" And she looked at me in the eye and said, "So is he the love of your life?"
Ooh.
And I get the chills now just thinking about it. I looked at her and I thought, oh my gosh, no, he's
Whoa.
not. I don't think that I can even pretend anymore, So
Wow.
in that moment, I had to decide, was I going to keep up the facade in order to please her, in order to please my family, in order to please his family, in order to please him and all the rest of it? Or was I gonna come clean and so that was the beginning of a lot of really really being real with myself. And it was super painful and hard.
I can
Like
imagine.
really hard.
Yeah. How
Um,
did you start that process?
well, I mean, just having the conversation with her was the beginning, but um, then it was like flying home from DC and then, having a conversation with my fiance, who is, by the way, a great guy, but just the wrong guy for me at the time. And so I started the process, um, sort of step by step, but I kind of did everything all at once. So, and like in retrospect, it sounds like a terrible idea. Like, why would you do that to yourself? Like, just, make so many changes all at once. But I couldn't do anything else. It was like I had to live in alignment. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. And it was the scariest thing, probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've given natural birth to 2 babies, and it wasn't as hard as that. So,
Wow.
but yeah, it was super hard and scary, scary, scary.
And what else were you quitting at that time besides
Yeah.
the
So,
relationship?
so I quit. Yeah. So I quit the relationship, and then I quit some friendships. One in particular that was really toxic, um, and then I quit smoking. I just kind of like cleaned house. I was like, there's all these distractions, and they are no longer in alignment with who I am. And I became really clear about my identity and who I was. And so it started with quitting lying to myself, and then it moved on to really quitting that identity that I had been holding and protecting. And once I started peeling those layers away, it just became really, really easy. So keep going. So, so that's why I did everything all at once.
Can you describe what your identity was and how you had formed that?
Ooh, that's a good question. My identity was I was a successful, career-driven, um, tough woman who could have it all. And, um, I rode a motorcycle a few years before that, and um, I just had this whole uh, identity around being tough and um, being able to take on anything. And so part of that was, I guess, being a smoker. I don't know. And I decided that was no longer, part of who I was. It wasn't in alignment with who I wanted to be. And so it was very easy to just drop that. And so people ask me like, well, how did you quit smoking? Because you must have been addicted. Well, yeah, I was smoking a pack a day for like 15 years at that point.
Wow.
I wasn't just like a part-time smoker. Um, but when I really got clear about what was in alignment with my identity and who I wanted to be, there was no room for that. And so it just literally was a shift. And I became and started acting like the person that I knew I was.
And how would you describe that person?
That person was someone who really cared about herself, who prioritized herself and didn't want to hide anymore, didn't want to hide in this safe relationship, hide in this workaholic job I had and all that. And so that was another thing I quit. I quit that job, even though I loved it and it was a great, career move. I moved on from that soon after that. And so I stepped into my new identity, which was someone who loved herself and um, prioritized uh, what I needed and wanted and stopped hiding.
And and I hope this doesn't get too down into the, therapy rabbit hole, but do you know what you were hiding from?
Um, yeah, I think I was hiding from being visible. I mean, just like if I could just, I just hid in my education and my career really all my life. I was a very good student all my life, always did very well in school in that structured environment. And that's where I knew I could excel. I knew I could do well in school and in my career. But when it came to anything, um, intimate or emotional or relationships, it was like, oh no, let me just, you know, keep myself hidden. Um, and so becoming really clear about that was part of that process.
Was there some kind of, excuse me, was there some kind of work you did that helped you find this inner self that had been beneath the other identity?
Um, so as soon as I articulated, what I really wanted in my life, that was the first step. And then I went searching, right, for all the tools and all the help and everything that could help me get through this because it was so, so incredibly difficult. And so I found a few tools. One was Byron Katie's work, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but
It's just like right. Oh, nope. Sorry. It's in my sauna. Well, that's where I read it.
oh,
But I was just
yes,
going to whip it out for the YouTube audience, but
right.
it's near me all the time.
Yeah, totally. So, um, I actually was browsing like a free book giveaway table at my condo building, and that book was there, and I looked at it and I picked it up, looked at it, read the title, and I remember thinking, oh, I don't need to read that right now. I put it down, and then I got up to my apartment and I opened my bag and it was there.
Whoa.
It was in my bag, and I was like, what? How did that get in my bag? So clearly I put it in my bag. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to read this. And it was really pivotal in helping me understand um, my attachments and just the whole thing that she goes through. So that was really great. And then I also was studying Buddhism.
Wow.
And so I combined that with studying Buddhism, and I read Loving What Is, Dalai Lama, book. Loving What, not Loving What Is. That's
I was like,
Byron
I
Katie.
think that's Byron
Yeah.
Katie's book, unless they wrote the same one.
Right. No, no. The book is called How to Expand Love. Yeah. So that between that and Loving What Is, I think those were the two really pivotal books. And I think we are attracted to different books at different times in our lives, and I've given both of those books to different people at different times, and they have not had the same impact as they did on me, or they totally did, but it just
Yeah.
depends. Like, you have to be ready and open and ready for that. So those were two tools that I definitely um, use, and it was a lot of, I did a lot of alone time. I stopped, like I said, a lot of the friendships and going out and that kind of thing, and just hunkered down.
Yeah. Like, hey, let's meet. Let's meet Giovanna. Let's figure out who you are
Yeah.
when you take away the friendships and the engagement and the toughness and whatever else you had.
Mhm.
Do you happen to think, and again, full disclosure, never smoked. Not that I've probably never had some vice at some point, but like that isn't one that I am personally familiar with. But do you think that some part of you is using the smoking as, because I can see that smoking would have two aspects. One could either be like a communal aspect if all your friends smoke, like, oh, we're all going to go out on this 7-minute break. I've been in jobs where like you felt left out if you didn't smoke because everybody would go out for this 7-minute break and you were stuck in the office and working by yourself. Everybody else is, fraternizing. There was even an episode of Friends about that.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, remember that one? Yeah.
totally.
And the other aspect is that it can be isolating. If you're addicted to it and you're not with people who are smoking, then you have to end up like kind of hiding it behind the restaurant when you walk outside for 7 minutes by yourself. What role of those two, if either, was it serving for you?
Yeah. Well, it started so bear in mind, I went to middle school and high school in England, and so smoking is a whole other level in Europe,
Oh,
right?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So I first tried cigarettes, I think, when I was 12, which was very normal there. Like everyone was doing it. Um, so that was part of it, was that it was a social thing for sure in my teenage years. And I think it just continued, and then I, was addicted, I guess, and it just continued. Um, but yeah, it was like part of the social scene there, definitely. And then, more recently in this country, in the US, it has been socially unacceptable. And I think that was really just taking hold. And when I quit 15 years ago, it was more so that way. So I think it was easier socially to quit because um, can't remember when the laws passed where you couldn't smoke any longer in bars and restaurants and things, but it was around about that time. So it was it was the social supports were there, the external social supports were there. I feel like because it wasn't as socially acceptable to be a smoker anymore. So
And how did you go through that process? Like, I realize you're doing this work, you're shedding this identity and the job and the relationship. Did you just one day throw away your cigarette pack and never look back, or was it a gradual process?
so I set a date, and I set a date not too far in the future, but of I think a couple weeks or something. And I just said, okay, on that day, like I'm done. And I remember having my last cigarette and being like, okay, that's it. And and on that day, June 1st, 2003, it was like, I'm done with that. It's over. And it truly was over. I just like made this psychological shift to where it was. And so, uh, yeah, that was it.
I've talked with somebody else who quit smoking, and he said one day he just decided his identity was as a non-smoker. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, I used to identify as a smoker. Somebody would walk by, hey, can I bum a cigarette off you? Or, like there was kind of this thing that went with his identity. And he said one day, I just decided, nope, I'm a non-smoker now. And it just was so much easier for him to quit after having made that mental shift.
That's
But I
exactly
often
right.
think, yeah, and your situation's a little different because you grew up in a country where it was very common. But here, and tell me if you think this rings true at all for you. I believe people gravitate toward vices for a reason. There's a stress that's leading to you wanting a release. So some people may have a stressful job. They come home, they grab a few more drinks than they should, or they're super stressed. They go gamble, or they feed up with comfort food because of toxic relationships. Was Were the cigarettes filling any kind of role like that for you at the time?
Yes, I definitely think that it was a way to disconnect and not have to be present in myself. It was another way for me to hide. And I think, people do that with cigarettes, with alcohol, with food, with sex, with gambling. I mean, whatever the vice is, right? And it's another way of hiding and disconnecting. And so part of quitting was like, I'm going to be present now. I'm going to be in my body, in my alignment, and um, be present for my life.
I love that. When you said you got quiet and you just kind of sat with yourself, were there meditation practices or journaling that you did?
Oh gosh, I painted my house.
I love it.
Let's see. Yeah, definitely journaling and lots of meditation. I mean, that was my discovery of Buddhism, really. It wasn't my discovery then, but it was when I fully embraced it and like really started practicing. Um, yeah, definitely. So meditation, journaling, um, and then other meditative type things like cooking, painting my house, those kinds of things where you could just like put music on, dance around the house, and do something productive.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because meditative practices are often overlooked. Like it's hard for some of us to sit there for a number of minutes and do nothing, but we'd
Mm-hmm.
still like I mean, I try. I mostly do breath work because it's doing something, which, I'm still working on. I would love to do one of these 10-day retreats that I could learn to really just sit there. But I've tried so many meditative practices, and the one that works for me is the not actually meditation, is the breath
Yeah.
work, because you're doing something, but I still end up at a meditative type state. I think you're absolutely right. I've gotten to that same state through dancing or painting, anything that, like you said, puts, maybe turns on your creative side or puts you in more of a flow state.
Mhm.
Anytime I think you get into that flow state, you're touching on the core of like your genius and your happiness. And like, if you're in a period where you're, supposedly looking for your passion, don't necessarily look for your passion. It's going to find you when you just open yourself up to doing more of these things that put you in that state.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as high achievers, which I definitely am, we tend towards, making things happen and being in action all the time. And really what we need to do is um, allow ourselves to go into that inner state, the intuition, or the kind of what I call the passive stage, which is where you allow yourself to just be with yourself, and whatever that means. And that's usually where you do a lot of journaling, meditation, a lot of those kinds of activities where you can really get into that. And then from there, you can go into a transition stage where you make some changes in your life and take big actions. And then after that, then you can get back into flow. But if you try to skip over
Yes.
or move too quickly through that intuition stage, um, then you kind of miss out that process, and then you go right into burnout or overwhelm again, and you don't get really to take advantage of that flow that we all want to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much pressure on, okay, find your passion now. Here, take this Myers-Briggs test, or go to this career counselor or coach. And career coaches are great. But I think some portion of the process should definitely be like, get to know yourself better. Because for most of us, we go to high school, then we go to college. We go into college not at all really knowing what we want to do, because how well do you know yourself at 18? Like, lucky is the person who knew what they wanted to do and just went straight through. Luckily, a lot of the skills are transferable, but sometimes we get shuttled just from college to maybe internship straight to job. And then like, we're out on our own, and our job is to like show that we can produce and show we can be independent. And after a few years of that, many of us hit this wall that you did, like, hold it, whose life was I living? I was living the supposed American dream, or dream of insert whatever country you're in, without ever stopping to take the time to be like, who am I? Now I'm 20 something or 30 something, whenever you come to that realization. And what did I really want to do? I mean, the last time I had a choice, I was 17 or 18.
Yeah, and for women, it's hard because a lot of us, not everybody, and I certainly never was always on this path, but a lot of us want to have a relationship and have a family. And I never was like really committed to like I'm going to be a mom, but when I went through this big awakening, it definitely was something that I was open to. And here I was in my early 30s, having just called off, this relationship. And like, I remember one of my mom's best friends, and this devastated me. She said, "Oh, so I guess you don't want to ever have kids." And I
Oh,
was
wow.
like,
Oh,
"Oh, don't tell me that." But that just made me fiercer. I was like, "Oh, I'll show you who's going to have kids." No.
I
But
love it.
yeah, it's like, no, 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 no. Do not label me.
No.
Um, so being in my early 30s, I took a good 2 or 3 years of being in the what I call in the well woman life cycle, which we talked about on the interview with you. I call the passive stage, where you go inward, you're doing a lot of that intuition work. And I stayed there for a good 2 or 3 years. And I know that sounds like a long time, and it doesn't have to be that long for everybody always. But if you're asking, like, when is this going to end, then you're probably not ready for it to end.
Right? Right?
Yeah, but if you stick with it and you do the work, then oh my gosh, the rewards at the end of it are amazing. And I ended up meeting the love of my life
Aw.
and having to beautiful kids and still growing my career and my business and everything. So it's possible.
Yes.
It's possible.
I love that. I love that so much. So many things in that story. One, the societal pressures of people and their judgment about your quit. So common. And that one was almost that one just hit hard. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of at the core of somebody who's decided I want to be a mother. And then she's like, oh, well, then clearly you have just destroyed your chances of that, which is completely unfounded. And thank goodness that you were strong enough to like get past that. But it's incredible what people will say to others who are going through their process. And it takes a strength to be like, no, I know for me what's the truth.
Right. And I will say that doing a lot of my work with Byron Katie's work and the Buddhism work really taught me that whatever people are saying, whatever judgments they have, and whatever words come out of their mouth are really about them and their baggage and
Yes.
not about me. I don't have to take that on board. You know, I can completely deflect that and be like, well, that's nice, but
Right.
I'm not going to take that on board. You know,
Right.
that may be your baggage, but it's not mine. And
Exactly.
yeah, so
I
at,
love that.
yeah, she said that to me when I was 33,
Wow.
34. And I ended up meeting my husband when I was 37, and we had our first kid when I was 38, and my second when I was 41.
Wow, congratulations. That's
Yeah, yeah.
that's incredible. And I also love what you said about if you're asking if it's over yet, then you're not ready. I've definitely in my own life went through this. I went through this period where I was quitting a startup and quitting a relationship around the same time and having these realizations like, okay, I need this, inner work. I need this time to be with myself. I got a new therapist and I started meditating and the journaling and all that. And I'm like, I'm going to be single for a year was my thing. And then like, 2 months later, I meet a guy and I'm like, no, I'm going to be single for a year. And as we start hanging out, I'm like, oh, my anxiety seems to be gone. I can start dating again. The second I started dating him, the anxiety all comes rearing back. And I'm like, oh yeah, you were clearly not cooked, honey. Like you came out of the oven too soon. Go
Mhm.
back in. Like you were not done. And that's a great point to get across is like when you're ready, the thing will show up and feel natural, whatever that thing is that you're looking for. The job will be a great fit. The relationships will flow a lot easier than they had
Yeah.
once you've done the work. That's how you know.
And the decisions you have to make are obvious. It,
Yeah.
it's really clear. And until that happens, you're not ready, and you need to work through that and with all of these different tools that I'm sure you offer and that we talked about already. And yeah, it's a process.
It's definitely a process. Is there any part of the process that I have not asked you about that you feel would be valuable to listeners that you'd like to talk about?
Um, I think just staying true to what you really want to create for yourself and being like just getting really honest about that, and stopping the lying to yourself and to others.
Yes.
And I'm sure people listening could make a whole list of things that they, could quit lying about. So that's one thing. And just the identity piece is so critical. Like um, I actually, we didn't even talk about this. I quit coffee like 4 years ago, and another quit. But again, it was the identity was the hardest part of that. Was like I identified as a coffee drinker. I liked being a coffee drinker. I like coffee shops. I like holding my cup of coffee. I like walking into a meeting with a cup of coffee. Like it is who I am. And so really shedding that identity in order to be in alignment with what the change was that I was making in my life was super important.
I love that you snuck that in at the end because so many people think these quits have to be giant jobs or city quits or relationships. And sometimes it's the small quits that make a difference, but it's also sometimes those are hard. And it's so funny that you say that because I've never been a coffee drinker and I kind of look at other coffee drinkers with this like not jealousy, but kind of like it's a romantic identity. It really is. They're always walking in with some nice warm beverage in their hands. And,
Right.
I mean, I hang out at coffee shops and get something else. I mean, I'll have a cortado or something, but I'm just not like whatever the American, hey, wake up, have the coffee thing. It just
Yeah.
isn't a thing I do. And it's funny that you say that because you're right. There are a lot of kind of comfort feelings associated with that. And if you decide, hey, I'm not down with this much caffeine or not down with coffee for whatever reason, or not even just down to being kind of addicted to any substance, it could be green tea or whatever, that is
Yeah.
your habit. You have to make that shift. I love that you brought that up because it's a small shift, but not an unimportant one and not an easy one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
very cool. Well, you've brought up a lot of great things for people to digest. Where can they find you besides we got the NPR One app and NPR Albuquerque website, social media, anything you'd like?
Yeah. Yeah, you can find me at Well Woman Life in all the social media spots, places, platforms. And you can go to wellwomanlife.com/quiz to do the little quiz to find out which stage you're in the Well Woman life cycle that we talked about.
Oh, very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. Giovanna, it's been a total pleasure having you on. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, it's been great to be here. Thanks.
All right, for everybody else out there, until next time, happy quitting.